Welcome to another edition of HL's Restoration Impacting Midwest Industries. And today we have a friend and acquaintance of mine, Joel Goldberg, who has a very large and positive impact on the Midwest and far beyond. Joel, welcome.
Charlie, good to be with you. And it's been in the works for a while, but now that other thing that I do is over with, I got a little bit of free time.
Well, so that's funny that you mentioned that, because straight out of the gate, I just want to ask you, have you ever seen a stranger time in sports broadcasting?
No, and I think that probably echoes every profession, right? No one has ever dealt with this before, whether it's your field, whether it's broadcasting, whether it's sales calls on Zooms, no matter what it is. But with that said, none of us have ever seen the sports world like this before. And as weird as it is, and as challenging as it is, and as different as it is, it beats what it was back in April, May, and June when there was nothing. So I do try to remember that a lot, that we have a long ways to go to get back to normal, if there is such a thing. But it was nice just to get sports back too.
I absolutely agree with that, and it's important. But one thing that I do want to know, and I've asked you this earlier, but what effect do you think it has on the players to not have any fans in the stands?
I think it's not an across the board thing, because everybody's wired differently. You will hear some players, and I'm talking about baseball, but I think this would probably be true for every sport. You will hear some players that say, I get in such a zone out there that I don't even hear the fans anyway. You have others that say, I'm motivated by the fans. I fuel off of their energy, the good and the bad. I'm on the road and a guy is ripping me, and it makes me mad and it makes me hungry. And there are others that get bothered by it that didn't have to deal with it now. So I think it was by person, but I think everybody knew, whether you noticed it or not, that it was different. It felt different. I think for the most part, it was more of a challenge for people, because at the highest of levels, and this is true for all the major sports, they're used to playing, a small crowd on a Wednesday night with bad weather on a team that doesn't draw well is still going to get 10,000 fans. Now we're talking about zero. I mean, we're hearing noises during games like you hear every siren in the distance. You sometimes can hear the animals or the birds chirping or that type of stuff. So, and then you got to get used to the pumped in crowd noise, which for a while to me just sounded like a meditation app. It just was all so weird until it wasn't. So I don't know that any of the guys loved it, but eventually you just adjust to it and it becomes the way it is.
Well, and you have to have some noise in there to drown out what may be an incorrect word or...
Yes. Well, let me take it a step further, because yes, there's that. Although the words that got you in trouble 5, 10, 20 years ago seem to get you in less trouble nowadays. Some of the words that you might accidentally hear over a broadcast or even on the news at this point would have never been allowed to be uttered in public in the past. So there's some of that. But there's a couple elements to this, along with not wanting, the kid at home to hear the F-bomb, whatever it is. One, players don't want to have to sit there and think about censoring themselves when they're in the moment. And I understand this from this standpoint. When I'm on the air, I'm very comfortable with what I do. But when outside elements start to creep in, my mind goes there. For me, it's if it's super cold or super hot, and now I'm worried on TV about I'm sweating on camera, and so my focus goes more towards that. The second I get off camera and I'm in the middle of a graphic or a video, I'm busy dabbing my forehead while I'm still trying to think about what I want. My attention gets diverted. And so I understand this, that if they're so hyper-focused on, I better not say anything bad here. If I strike out, I better not say this four-letter word. Well, where's their mind at? So I think that, the teams and the organizations, beyond just protecting some of the fans and the families at home, said, we want our guys to just be in their natural element. The other side to that, and we saw this creep in a little bit early on, there were some fights and some near brawls. And baseball didn't want any of that to begin with. They don't want it ever anyway, because where's the social distancing when you start getting into a brawl? There's not a whole lot of good going on there. Well, some of these brawls, Charlie, were being started because the players were hearing each other from the other dugout and they were misunderstanding each other. A guy's screaming and yelling at himself and they think he's yelling at him. So all the stuff that you wouldn't hear before, you were suddenly hearing and misinterpreting. So, hey, let's crank up that fake crowd noise and at least temper this down a little bit. Or last one on this, I think one of the first pitches thrown in an intra-squad game at Kauffman Stadium right before they actually started the season, I think Whit Merrifield steps into the box. And the coaches are behind him because they got the cage out there and all that. And Danny Duffy's on the mound. And he throws a ball, or wherever he throws it, and Duffy mutters to himself, get that ball, on the inside of the plate. And Merrifield turns back to the manager, Mike Matheny, and he goes, I guess I know the next one's coming inside. So, they understood that they had to be able to provide that crowd noise, not just for the fans, but for the players too.
Well, and hockey kind of has its, they've cornered the market on the brawls.
Yes.
But so I'm going to transition a little bit because besides the sports broadcasting, there's so much more. There's all the public speaking engagements that you do. There is a daily, I'm not sure if it's still daily, the podcast, which has been really, really cool. And then there's a new book in the works. So if we can, and I've heard you speak multiple times, and it's really fantastic. It's not a cookie cutter. It's very motivational and it's very good. Would you just give us a little bit about how you get the inspiration for the speeches and that sort of thing?
Well, first off, I'll say I'm getting tired just hearing about all those things, and it's reminding me that I'm probably doing more than I should. It's also the way that I'm wired. I don't sit still very well. I think a lot of people don't sit still well. I'm not unique there. But about 4+ years ago, I was really nothing more than a broadcaster. And I don't mean to say that in a way that demeans myself. It's just what I did. And it's what I'd always done. And I was happy doing it. And, occasionally I would get asked to go speak to a group. And by that, I wasn't networked or connected with anyone at all. People maybe knew me if they watched our broadcasts. I didn't know them. And so, I'd occasionally get asked to speak to the Rotary Club or something like that. And that was fun. But that's easy. Here's who I am. Here's where I've been. Here's what's going on with the team. Does anyone have any questions? Thanks for having me and appreciate the lunch. That's pretty much it. You didn't have to think a whole lot. And then I was asked to speak to a couple groups, and they paid me a little bit of money, and I thought I better come up with something, and so I did. And then I had a friend say to me that understood the industry, you could start a business. And I said, I could do what? Because I'd never lived in the real world. And I call what you do and most people do the real world. I call what we do Fantasyland. We work as hard as everyone else. It is more work than people realize. But at the end of the day, they pay me to talk about baseball. If you enjoy sports, this is a pretty good thing. What I came to understand, Charlie, was that there are so many lessons, and you've heard me talk about these, in sports, especially baseball because it's every day, that translate to any and every profession. Start talking about leadership. Start talking about building successful teams, culture, diversity, communication, on and on and on. And I thought, I've got a lifetime worth of experiences, and they're never going to run out because I keep having new ones every single day. And so that's when I started this business 4 years ago, which then had the podcast and on and on and on. And so, I'm living over 50% of my professional career right now outside of baseball, but they're kind of both married together. And I never had any idea that I was an entrepreneur, but I am. and I love it.
And it's a message that transcends all, I mean, industries and groups, and I mean, it really does. And so we'll put up how people can get in touch with you on if they want to do have you talk to you about a speaking engagement. But I also I want to delve in because you're also writing a book.
Yeah.
And
I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, and so, do you enjoy the writing of a book? I mean, I've never done it.
Neither had I.
What was the genesis behind it? And now that you are waist to neck deep in it, what's it like?
It's at times exhilarating, definitely stressful. So here's how it happened, and I think it's a little bit different for me than other writers. I mean, I'm still cringing at thinking of myself as a writer. I've actually always been a writer. I mean, I've always been a good writer, but for 20-something years, that writing was on TV. You're talking about writing 30-second blip here, and most of what I do in baseball is ad lib. I don't write a whole lot, but a feature story or some what we would call voice tracks. Hey, most recently, Alex Gordon retires, and they said, "Hey, can you do a piece on a retrospective?" And
which was cool,
which was amazing, and especially having been with him 13 of his 14 years of his career, and so that's where it's like, oh, this is awesome. I love to write, and I'm going to be heartfelt. But for this book, what happened was when I made the jump into being a speaker, which, by the way, you don't just say, hey, I'll be a speaker today. I mean, it was, let me hire a speaking coach and let me hire a consultant, and what do I do with all this material and how does it work? And you've talked about how it's not a canned speech, and it's not, but there is a rhythm to it and there is a thought to it. And, so I had to learn how to put all that together. But anyway, when I started the speaking career, everyone and their mother said you have to write a book, which I've come to understand means that in the speaking world, a book is one big giant business card. It's validation. It's a bit of who you are. And not to mention that oftentimes companies want to buy, hey, we want you to speak. Do you have a book to sell also? So I met with an author right away. And she looked at me and she says, I tell her my story, and she goes, you're not ready to write a book. And I would have been offended if not for the fact that I'm like, she's saying exactly what's in my head. I'm not ready to write a book. She said, start a podcast instead. I said, how come? She said, 4 reasons. She said, 1, you already know how to interview people. You do that for a living. Okay, fair. 2, it's new content. Okay, potentially for the book later. 3, it's a networking opportunity. It's a chance to get to sit in front of people and meet them. 4, it's a branding opportunity. If everyone only knows you as the baseball guy, do a podcast about something other than baseball. So while I called it Rounding the Bases, which could really mean anything, it was about leadership and culture and all that. Now, fast forward a few years later, and I'm thinking, I have interviewed so many CEOs and executives, not to mention all the baseball people. I got enough for a book. Not only do I have enough for a book, I probably have enough for other books, which let's put that one aside. And so now
careful.
It's just, careful. Now it's just putting it all together. And, some days I write for 3 hours and other days I write for nothing. But we're down to crunch time now.
So, and that brings us into the podcast piece. Has there been a specific podcast that when you finished it, you just went, wow.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, one or two of them that just completely stand out in your mind that when you started it, you thought, I don't know where this is going to go. And then when you finished it, it could change your thought process, your mind, or you went, uh-oh.
Yeah, no, I mean, to some extent, they all have something. I'm guilty, and you could hear it in my answers here, of either talking too much or I'm a storyteller. And so to me, I want to get to all of the story. And I've come to understand that, sometimes there's 5 hours worth of story that can be told in 30 minutes. There's an art to doing that too. But I do find that every single person has something really interesting to talk about. But as far as, some of the most interesting ones, sometimes it's the story. And that's where I find that maybe the entrepreneur or the leader or whoever it is that most people don't know, but they have this unbelievable story. That's the exciting part for me. It's like, I get to help tell this story, and it's really like, a Hollywood type of story, but nobody knows it. So those are amazing. For instance, there's a guy that I interviewed that started a nonprofit, and he had grown up on the east side of Kansas City, bad neighborhood, African-American kid who understood, based on the neighborhood he grew up in with drugs and gangs and violence, that he just wouldn't make it out of his 20s. It was expected that he just wouldn't make it. And then he gets shot. And he's sure he's going to die. And he's paralyzed. And he's lying in the hospital bed, and he's laid up for 2 years. And something comes over him. He's got a daughter, and he's the primary caretaker. And she makes this comment to him about when he's in his wheelchair that, "Dad, that's your Superman chair." And he said, "Wow, okay." And he turns his life around. He's shorter, overweight, and he gets into fitness competitions, and he's doing all the Paralympic type of stuff. And he forms a nonprofit for athletes with disabilities. And the show Queer Eye on Netflix does a whole show on him, and now suddenly he's nationally known. And it's like, I get to tell this story. But then the other side of it is interviewing, say, a guy like Jeff Jones, the CEO of H&R Block, and he had been the chief marketing officer at Target, and then he was at Uber. And, now you have 30 minutes because he's got that next meeting starting right after, so you got to hit it dead on. And he makes a comment about there's a slippery slope between tradition and irrelevance. And I hear that, and I'm like, whoa, everybody can learn from that. Think about H&R Block. They can't do their taxes today the way they did in the 60s, right? Think about Netflix versus Blockbuster. Think about Uber versus cabs, and how much disruption and how often the world changes. So sometimes it's just that little comment. And then my mind over the years was going, that's going to be in a book. That's got to be in a book. And that's where I am now.
Well, I think, and the podcast that you were discussing, I've seen, and it is, if people haven't seen it, they need to go back, find it.
Wesley Hamilton, very powerful.
It is very powerful. It's you can't watch that whole thing and walk away and just not think anything else of it. It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Well, and there's something else too, just real quick, and I think that everybody can learn from this. I mean, you don't have to be a podcast host or an announcer or a speaker.
Which clearly I'm not.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. But if the mindset, and this was my mindset when I started, if the mindset is, well, every podcast I do needs to lead to a speech, that becomes salesy, And so it doesn't have to be podcast. Think about everything you do. And, the first 6, 8, 10 episodes I did, I was like, well, what's this going to lead to? Well, what's this going to lead to? And then I just realized I enjoy telling these stories. So stop worrying about whether this person is going to lead. Yes, you want to have strategy. Yes, you want to be able to introduce people that could potentially help you. But flip it around the other way. How can I help promote them? How can I help tell their story? What can this do for other people? And so, when I look for guests, I don't necessarily look for something that is just going to put money in my pocket or help me. But I do want to help the brand, but it doesn't all need to lead to money, and it might later on. But I think that there's a lesson there of saying, like, just do good stuff.
A go-giver.
You and I were talking about that.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I'm going to just, and we don't ever tell people, but I'm just going to ask you some random questions, which you are just going to love.
Perfect.
And they're more for my entertainment value and people's watching entertainment value than anything else. So what scene from a movie scared you for life?
Ooh. I think, was it that hotel scene or the hallway scene in The Shining? I don't really know that I have any desire to watch that again. Like, I've thought about, I'll watch Silence of the Lambs if I can get the kids to try to watch that. My daughter wouldn't, my son might. But I think, a lot of those movies when I was growing up, the Friday the 13th stuff was more cheesy than scary. But The Shining, that bits of that movie, kind of get you shaking a little bit.
Stick with you. Okay, so what's your most impressive go-to meal that you cook?
There are two things I cook well, and I don't think they're anything special at all. So I'm good with breakfast and I'm good with the grill. But I think any type of omelets, I'm really good with that.
A breakfast guy.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be by.
Yeah, come on by. I'll put anything in that omelet. I'm good with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Bloody Marys?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Spicy.
What your least favorite mode of transportation?
I would say I'm kind of lazy, sometimes very lazy. So bike, I feel like that takes a lot of work.
I'm right with you. I'm completely out on
I'm
that.
not, and it's not a matter of timing. Like my mind's going places here, but if I can get on, like when we stay in Baltimore to play the Orioles, and you could either take the team bus, you could take a cab, you could walk, which in the heat in Baltimore, I don't mind walking, but in the heat in Baltimore, which is very much like Kansas City, sometimes a little muggier, is not a 30-minute walk I want to do in a suit. But sometimes I'll hop on a water taxi, which takes an extra 20 minutes because it hits all the stops. But I'm just like, I just kind of like being on the water. This is fun. But the biking takes work.
I'm with you. Okay. Which baseball city has the best groupies?
Oh. By groupies, I know you're not talking about me, but
No.
or for me, but in terms of, it's interesting because like traveling with the Royals versus I assume traveling with, say, the Yankees is different because a lot more security with the Yankees, right? They're more highly visible. Although all that traffic picked up after the Royals won and we started seeing a lot more people on the road. But I think just like groupie fan hanging around a hotel. It's not New York actually because you can get lost in New York with so much else going on. But I think Boston's pretty rabid.
Okay, and pop quiz, and if this answer is incorrect, we can always edit it out.
Or just tell me I was wrong.
I don't know the answer.
Oh, okay.
What's the distance between home plate and second base?
Well, it's 60 feet 6 inches to the mound, but I don't know that I ever thought about home to second because nobody's ever run that before.
Can you get like a catcher or anybody you might know on the? No, I'm teasing.
They, the measurements we have for that is always what they call pop time, which is how long it takes a catcher from the moment the ball hits his glove to the moment it gets to the second baseman or shortstop when he's trying to throw out a runner, which is like under 2 seconds. Boom, boom, there. But I don't know what the distance is.
Okay, and this is completely off topic, but
Would it be double 60 feet 6 inches? Wouldn't that be halfway?
we can.
Someone watching's better at math than me, or or geometry, or.
Okay, have you ever actually stood there and had somebody throw a ball by you at 95 or 100 miles an hour before?
I can do better. With the location that I often sit, more on the road, depends on the city, and I'm not a diva, but I don't want to sit in 100-degree heat for 9 innings if I'm in a suit. But I'm at least down in, by the dugout for an inning or two and then back here and there to do some reports. And there are just certain stadiums where the angles and the proximity to that camera well by the dugout are closer than others. And I have had scorching foul balls off the bat, which had to have been well over 100 miles an hour, miss me by like half of an inch. That will get your heart going. I could think of some in Cleveland where you really have to watch out. First base side, so right-handed bat if they're late and that thing comes shooting in, where, you look where it hit and there's a big mark right next to you and you're like, that maybe could have killed me. So I do have this rule that anytime I'm near anywhere where a foul ball can go, and my attention span's not great to begin with, but I'm usually looking something up or I'm writing down a note, and I will not do that. I do it in between pitches. And there's almost like a rhythm in your head. Like you start to know the pitcher is throwing every 15 or 20 seconds or 30 seconds, and you just kind of right, look up, right, look up, and look up, because you have no chance otherwise.
Well, it's
scary.
It is. When that's coming by you that fast, first of all, just to be able to see it's one thing. Secondly, that's really something. Well, I want to thank you, but I do have one thing. I heard a bird told me that you happen to be a barbecue fan.
Yeah, which, by the way, who's not? I guess some people aren't.
Well, so I wanted you to take you and your team, your family, out and grab a little barbecue, and that's one of my spots that I like to go to. So anyway, thank you so much for coming by. We we'll have how to get in touch with you for the speaking and some of the podcast things.
Appreciate it.
And we're looking forward to getting to take a look at your book and read that. And again, I appreciate it, and it's great to see you.
Well, it's always good to see you, Charlie. Thanks for the Jack Stack, by the way. That's as good as it gets, in my opinion. And the book will be out mid-December. Just finally came up with a title this week. And so the title, it's about small ball, the little things that add up to the big things in baseball and life and business. So the book will be Small Ball, Big Results.
Awesome. Can I get my copy signed?
Oh, yeah. What's your name again?
Thanks, Pards.
Thanks, Charlie.
Talk to you in a bit.